Fans are inconsolable after David Attenborough's devastating disclosure. He has been the reliable narrator of the world's most remarkable natural history stories for decades. However, the reality about his health, his challenges, and what he's finally revealing tells us that the end might be closer than we believe, and he's getting close to 100 years old. One final request, more personal and pressing than anybody had anticipated, lies at the heart of it all: ancestry and ascent to stardom. The term voice of nature describes David Attenborough perfectly. A serene figure leading viewers on a journey into the unknown, across icy tundra and the depths of the ocean, revealing the lifestyles of species that were previously unknown to the public. But that recognizable voice masks a guy whose life struggles, which never garnered much attention, molded his journey. And now, as he nears 100 years old, the most recent news about him feels incredibly tragic. David was born into an educated family in Isleworth, London on May 8, 1926. He was the second of 3 sons. As the principal of University College in Leicester, Frederick Attenborough fostered a home brimming with literature, ideas, and an insatiable need for knowledge. The value of kindness was instilled in David from an early age. In reality, the Attenboroughs took in youngsters in need of a safe haven as the Nazis' horrors swept over Europe. All of David's values, responsibility, empathy, and a recognition that there is more to life than material wealth, were shaped by his formative years. As a result of these events, David decided to combine his 2 great loves, music and the environment, into one academic career. So, from 1947 to 1948, he attended Clare College, Cambridge, to study natural sciences, with a focus on geology and zoology. His approach to storytelling would be defined by the scientific discipline he gained from this training. Nature was never something esoteric or remote to Attenborough. Structure, logic, and intricately linked systems ruled his perception of the universe. In every video he narrated, his scientific expertise would serve as the foundation. A brief stint at an educational publishing business preceded Attenborough's entry into broadcasting. He began what would become one of the most consequential careers in television history in 1952 when he joined the BBC. He never intended to be an actor when he was younger. Instead of starring in programs, he planned to work behind the scenes as a producer and shaper. Nonetheless, the BBC immediately acknowledged his vast expertise, poise, clarity, and intelligence, which he brought to each task. In 1954, he achieved his first big break with Zoo Quest, a groundbreaking television series that brought a new level of discovery, natural history, and travel together. Viewers were captivated by Attenborough's composed demeanor and the show's fresh perspective. Viewers could finally see unusual species in their native habitats, accompanied by an expert who spoke the language of science as if it were second nature. A new age in wildlife television began with Zoo Quest, which also revolutionized Attenborough's career. Nevertheless, Attenborough's impact went well beyond just presenting. He became the brains behind BBC Two's most innovative era in 1965 when he took over as controller of the network. Among the daring and innovative shows he commissioned that revolutionized British television were Arena, an art series, Monty Python's Flying Circus, and a plethora of documentaries pertaining to culture and science. Even after he stepped down as director, the BBC's influence continued to grow thanks to his emphasis on innovation. Attenborough chose to return to presenting, his actual calling, despite his success as an executive. He released the groundbreaking natural history series Life on Earth in 1979, which was viewed by over 500 million people globally. Combining science, storytelling, and worldwide exploration on a scale never attempted by television before, the project set a new bar for wildlife filmmaking. Not only did the series impact Attenborough personally, but it also revolutionized natural history television as a whole. A string of sequels followed, each one taking wildlife documentaries to new heights. Nature was not the only thing that Attenborough documented. With meticulous care and reverence, he unveiled it piece by piece, molding generations of spectators. He was knighted in 1985 for his distinguished career, which spanned decades and garnered him numerous BFAs and Emmys. The sincerity and purity of his voice made him instantly recognizable. But the man that fans came to know was not always this way. Behind the fame, the accolades, the respect, and the comforting familiarity, there were trials. Difficulties that he subtly carried away from the camera, built up over a lifetime of recording the world's splendor and devastation. Hidden battles that lead to stardom. David Attenborough may give the impression of being impenetrable, but there is a lot more nuance to his extraordinary career than meets the eye. There are tangible mental and physical effects of his decades of investigation, miles of travel, and harsh environments. Attenborough traversed some of the planet's most hostile landscapes for over 70 years. He had to be extra careful because he filmed amid monsoon rains, sweltering heat, icy winds, and thick woodlands. While these settings informed his documentaries, they were also very taxing on his joints. In the early 2010s, he felt the effects of years of stooping, climbing, and navigating rough terrain. A knee replacement, a formidable surgical procedure that necessitates a protracted recuperation and meticulous rehabilitation, was performed on him in 2015. His body had taken a physical beating from a lifetime of chasing after the world's craziest tales, and the operation was evidence of that. The limitations he faced were not the only obstacle, though. Another impending problem, the likelihood of cognitive impairment, became more apparent to Attenborough as he aged. Loss of lucidity, independence, and the capacity to explain the natural world in the same manner he always had was his biggest personal worry, as he has admitted in interviews. He was more worried about losing the ability to do the job that had defined him for so long than he was about really aging. But the most momentous part of his career may have occurred before he became the superstar he is today. While shooting near the Great Barrier Reef in 1957, it occurred. Jacques Cousteau's open-circuit diving helmet was still in its experimental music phases when Attenborough and his crew were testing an early prototype of the gear. There was a technical glitch. His suit's air pressure plummeted, and he realized he couldn't breathe. He later recalled the moment vividly, saying, "When I put mine on for the first time, I suddenly felt water coming around my chin and up over my mouth. I thought, this can't be right. And by the time the water rose to my nose, I thought, I'm sure this is not right. But then, of course, if you get this thing screwed on top of you, you can't breathe. You can't even make yourself heard. The malfunction could have been fatal. And he had only seconds to react. He managed to surface in time, but the close call stayed with him for the rest of his life. It was one of those rare moments when the dangers of film became painfully real. A reminder that documenting the natural world required more than curiosity. It required genuine risk. Attenborough spoke about this incident again during a 2025 conversation with Prince William while promoting a major ocean documentary. Even after nearly 7 decades, the memory still carried the weight of what could have happened. It was a reminder that behind the calm narration and measured delivery were experiences that shaped him in ways viewers rarely understood. These challenges never deterred him from his work, but they did shape the man behind the legend. The constant travel meant long stretches away from home. The extreme environments left their impressions on his body, and the fear of losing his clarity weighed on him more than public audiences ever saw. And while the world sees a man defined by his achievements, there is another chapter that shaped him just as deeply. One of personal loss, grief, and the emotional cost of a life spent mostly in motion. Tragic loss of wife. David Attenborough's marriage to Jane Elizabeth Ebworth Oriel was a partnership that shaped nearly half a century of his adult life. While their union was not widely publicized or built on glamour or the rhythms of celebrity culture, it was definitely rooted in stability, shared values, and a deep respect that endured through decades of change. They tied the knot in 1950 at St. Dan's Church on Kew Green, a modest ceremony that set the tone for a relationship unmarred by the spotlight. Jane was from Merthyr Tydfil, Wales, and unlike many spouses connected to public figures, she chose a life far removed from cameras or attention. Her world was quieter, built around home, children, and the supportive role she carried with unwavering steadiness. Attenborough's career required long stretches away, but their relationship absorbed the distance with a kind of resilience that few couples could manage. Together, they raised 2 children. Their son Robert became a lecturer in biological anthropology, continuing the family's long connection to scientific inquiry, while their daughter Susan pursued education, eventually serving as a headmistress, shaping the lives of students with the same calm discipline her parents modeled. Despite their father's growing fame, both children grew up largely shielded from publicity, grounded by the normalcy Jane maintained at home. For over 47 years, their marriage stood as the anchor around which Attenborough's demanding career revolved. It was Jane who managed the household during his long filming expeditions. Jane who kept the children secure through endless relocations, uncertainties, and late-night calls from distant corners of the world. And Jane, who gave Attenborough the emotional foundation that allowed him to travel, return, reset, and begin again. But in 1997, everything changed. Jane suffered a sudden brain hemorrhage, a medical emergency that struck without warning, and left no time for preparation. Attenborough rushed to her side, returning from filming as quickly as possible. But the event unfolded with a finality that no amount of experience or composure could soften. Her death ended their nearly 5 decades together in a moment that felt brutally out of rhythm with the life they had built. Attenborough later described the impact, simply saying her death left him lost for a man known worldwide for clarity, direction, and steady narration. The loss dismantled the center of his private world. The timing added another layer of difficulty. His children were adults by then with their own careers and responsibilities. But grief does not respect independence. It reshaped the family, creating a space where her presence had once been constant. Professionally, the loss fell during a period of intense creative work. Attenborough had documentaries in progress, commitments to networks, and filming plans that required travel. Yet, even in the shadow of his grief, he returned to work, not because it was easy, but because he understood the rhythm of his life. The natural world had always been his refuge, the place where he regained perspective in the face of personal turmoil. Continuing to work did not erase the pain, but it offered structure when everything else felt unsteady. Balancing this grief with his career was one of the quietest struggles of his life. For decades, Jane had been the constant point he returned to after every expedition. Without her, the process of traveling, filming, and narrating took on a different emotional weight. Every departure meant returning to a home that no longer felt the same. Every achievement came without the private celebration they once shared. Attenborough is not someone who speaks openly about personal hardships, but those close to him noted how deeply Jane's absence shifted his sense of grounding. Yet even through the pain, he honored her memory by continuing his work with the same integrity and dedication she had supported for decades. In the years that followed, Attenborough's documentaries began to reflect a subtle but undeniable shift. His tone grew more urgent, his warnings more pointed, and his focus less on spectacle and more on preservation. Many viewers felt that his personal loss deepened his connection to the world he documented, giving his voice a new emotional undercurrent. And as he stepped into this next phase, he placed his focus more on his public advocacy, the campaigns he championed, and the global movements he helped inspire. Public advocacy and campaigns. David Attenborough's influence has never been limited to television. As his documentaries reached global audiences, he became a central voice in the discussion about the planet's future. For decades, he has carried the responsibility of translating complex environmental science into language that ordinary viewers can understand. A task he approached with the same clarity and respect that defined his storytelling from the beginning. His advocacy intensified as the world began confronting the realities of biodiversity loss and global warming. Attenborough understood that the camera could capture beauty, but it could also capture disappearance, melting ice caps, shrinking forests, and collapsing ecosystems. And so, the distance between entertainment and warning, music, narrowed. He began using what started as natural history as a global environmental message. In 2021, he was named the People's Advocate for the United Nations Climate Change Conference, a role designed to inspire international cooperation and public involvement. It was an acknowledgement not just of his authority, but of the trust he had earned over a lifetime. Attenborough's task was simple in description, but enormous in scale. Motivate the world to act. His presence helped frame the conference in human terms, reminding leaders that climate change was not an abstract political issue, but a growing threat experienced by communities, wildlife, and generations to come. That same year, he addressed the UN Security Council, warning with directness that climate instability was becoming one of the greatest security challenges of the modern era. His tone was measured and the weight of his message was unmistakable. Attenborough did not speak as a politician or a theorist. He spoke as someone who had watched the world's natural rhythms shift over 7 decades of first-hand observation. Throughout this period, his personal life remained under scrutiny. As a global figure, he faced the pressure of being seen as the voice of nature even while navigating aging, health concerns, and private grief. Audiences expected consistency and expected him to appear calm, wise, and confident. But holding that role through personal vulnerability has been one of the quiet challenges that shaped his later years. Despite the demands placed on him, Attenborough continued to advocate for renewable energy, reduced consumption, and biodiversity protection. His voice is a bridge between scientific communities and the public, offering explanations that feel accessible without oversimplifying the urgency of the issues. In 2024, his advocacy extended to local conservation efforts, including his support for the Wildlife Trust's Rothbury Estate campaign, an ambitious project aiming to raise £30 million to protect more than 9,500 acres of land in Northland. The campaign reflected his long-standing belief that conservation must happen both globally and locally through grand international agreements and through decisions made in individual communities. Film has remained his most powerful tool. Attenborough consistently used documentaries to make environmental science easily understandable to millions who might never read a scientific report or attend a conference. Through film, he showed the patterns beneath the surface: coral bleaching, species decline, changing weather systems, and disappearing habitats. His work did not simply present facts. It connected them to reality, urging viewers to recognize the consequences of inaction. Yet, even a figure as respected as Attenborough could not escape criticism. His advocacy, while widely praised, also drew pushback from groups who questioned his views, challenged his messaging, or misinterpreted his intentions, controversies, and scandals. As David Attenborough's influence grew, so did the scrutiny surrounding his work. Many of the controversies he faced were not traditional scandals, but debates about responsibility, accuracy, and the delicate balance between storytelling and science. Or someone whose legacy rests on trust. Even minor disputes became amplified, especially in an era where environmental issues are politically charged. One major controversy came from how the BBC handled impartiality. When Wild Isles was released, reports claimed that an episode focusing on how humans damaged the environment was kept off regular TV to avoid political arguments. The BBC said the episode was always meant to be online only, but the accusation spread quickly. Some critics felt that leaving it off television downplayed the seriousness of environmental damage. Others argued the BBC was simply following strict rules about staying neutral. The debate showed how difficult it can be to talk openly about science inside a large institution that must avoid political bias. Attenborough also became a target of climate change denial groups. They questioned his explanation of wildlife decline, especially his coverage of walruses in the Arctic. These groups claimed he exaggerated the effects of climate change, even though scientific research supported his statements. Unfortunately, the claims spread across social media, confusing viewers who didn't know how to separate misinformation from scientific fact. Attenborough rarely responded to these attacks. He chose to stay focused on evidence. But the incident showed how even accurate science can become a target in modern public debates. But it didn't end there. He faced even more criticism after speaking about population growth and how rising human numbers put pressure on the planet. His point was based on long-term environmental trends. But some people felt the explanation didn't fully capture other major causes like unequal use of resources or industrial pollution. Others agreed with him, saying the issue was important to address honestly. There have also been questions about his wildlife filmmaking ethics. Music. From time to time, critics pointed out that some scenes in nature documentaries are filmed in controlled settings when capturing them in the wild is almost impossible. This practice is common in the industry, and production teams usually explain when it happens. Still, misunderstandings occur, and some viewers felt unsure about which scenes were completely natural. Attenborough's goal has always been to show true animal behavior, whether filmed in the wilderness or in a carefully managed environment designed to reflect natural conditions. Another concern has been the carbon footprint of large wildlife productions. These documentaries often require teams to travel across the world, which increases emissions, something that seems at odds with environmental messaging. Critics have questioned how much travel is necessary. In response, production teams have made efforts to offset emissions, use fewer flights, and adopt newer tools that reduce environmental impact. Even with these efforts, the issue remains complicated. Showing the global effects of climate change often requires filming in many different locations, and that reality can't always be avoided. Attenborough rarely reacts to criticism directly. Instead, he lets scientific evidence speak for itself. His focus has always been on making environmental issues clear and understandable without turning them into arguments. But holding that role of being the trusted voice of nature comes with real pressure. And as he moved into his late 90s, concerns about his health began to weigh on him. Health issues. As David Attenborough entered his late 80s and 90s, the physical strain of his life's work began to show in ways that even he couldn't ignore. For decades, he had pushed his body through demanding environments, climbing cliffs, walking deserts, diving into oceans, and traveling across continents. However, eventually age caught up with him and the signs appeared slowly but unmistakably. One of the most significant moments came in 2013 when he was 87 years old. Doctors had to fit him with a pacemaker to stabilize his heart rhythm. The device helped control irregular beats and reduce the risk of sudden complications. It was a serious medical step that reminded everyone, including Attenborough himself, that he was no longer the young explorer who could move endlessly from one remote location to the next. Yet, even with the weight of the procedure and the recovery it required, he returned to work quickly, showing how deeply he valued his mission. But as he moved further into his 90s, another health challenge has become harder to ignore. Attenborough has spoken openly about his struggle with memory lapses, which makes him occasionally forget names or small details while filming. This was a normal sign of aging. But for someone responsible for explaining complex natural processes with precision, it was harder to deal with. He worried about how these lapses might affect the quality of his narration and his ability to guide viewers through scientific stories with accuracy. Even when the lapses were minor, the concern stayed with him. Sadly, age also began to touch his voice. The tool that made him recognizable around the world. The soft, measured tone that defined generations of documentaries gradually grew weaker with time. His breath support changed. The pace of his delivery slowed, and the once effortless clarity now required careful attention. Producers had to adjust their schedules to allow for more breaks, and recording sessions that once took an afternoon could stretch into days. But Attenborough approached these changes calmly, understanding that age shapes everyone in different ways. Despite all of these challenges, Attenborough continued working into his late 90s, filming new series, recording narration, and appearing in environmental campaigns. Each project required more effort than the one before. Yet he refused to step back. What kept him moving wasn't ambition or ego. Music, was purpose. He had spent decades witnessing the rapid changes in the natural world. And he felt a responsibility to communicate those changes as clearly as possible. But with every passing year, the gap between his will and his physical limits grew wider. Traveling became harder. Long filming days tested his stamina. Even simple tasks demanded more focus. His body was slowing down even as his sense of duty remained sharp. What made this stage of his life especially difficult was the public expectation placed on him. Attenborough wasn't just a filmmaker anymore. He had become a global symbol of environmental truth. People looked to him for guidance and authority. But behind the scenes, he was an aging man, working through very human worries. The fear of losing memory, the strain of weaker breath, and the reality of heart problems. These private experiences didn't diminish his dedication, but they added a quieter emotional layer to his later work. Viewers noticed that his narration carried more reflection, more softness, and sometimes the faint tremor of someone who understood he was entering the final moments of his life. And as he continued working through his 90s, he began speaking more openly about something he had rarely addressed throughout his long career: his own mortality and the heartbreaking reflections that come with knowing his time is limited. Heartbreaking reflections on mortality. By the time David Attenborough reached 98 and 99, he began speaking more openly about aging than ever before. After a lifetime of traveling, filming, and pushing through demanding work schedules, he finally acknowledged that he was moving into the last chapter of his life. While promoting Ocean in 2025, he admitted he knew he was nearing the end. This confession surprised people, especially because he rarely talked about himself this way. For decades, he kept the spotlight on nature, not on his personal life. But at nearly 100 years old, he finally allowed people to see a bit more of what aging felt like for him. Loneliness has been one of the hardest parts. After his wife passed in 1997, Attenborough continued working nonstop. But in old age, the quiet moments at home have become more noticeable. His children live independent lives. And although they remain close to him, they have their own families and responsibilities. Long stretches of time between visits sometimes leave him feeling isolated, especially after returning from long filming trips. Even so, he's never used age as a reason to step back. He kept filming well into his late 90s and stayed involved in environmental campaigns, always pushing forward. And when he talked about the future, he focused on younger generations, the people who would inherit the planet he'd spent his life documenting. Attenborough has begun speaking about oceans, wildlife, and shrinking habitats with a new level of urgency. He had seen the damage happen up close over 7 decades, and he knew that the next steps belonged to those who would outlive him. The message was simple. Protecting the planet mattered more now than ever. In an interview, he said, "When I first saw the sea as a young boy, it was thought of as a vast wilderness to be tamed and mastered for the benefit of humanity. As I near the conclusion of my life, we now know that the reverse is actually true. Preserving the ocean is a global conservation effort. After documenting Earth for so long, I can honestly say that nothing else matters more." His attention has been on practical matters rather than emotional farewells or lengthy speeches. He hoped that by sharing the truth about Earth's plight, people would realize how serious the problem is and how much more they could do to help. Looking back is not the point of Attenborough's reflections. Encouraging the world to look ahead is their main focus. At 100 years old, he hasn't wavered from his original mission, to show people the Earth while also reminding them that it can't defend itself. Are you of the same opinion as David Attenborough? Leave a comment with your responses. If you liked this video and would want to see more like it, please subscribe to our channel and click the next video button.